Despite developing the brain being the main focus, the main purpose of education, many of us working in schools know surprisingly little about how it functions. In fact, the brain, our most complex organ, remains something of a mystery, even to the scientists who spend their lives studying it. But there are some things they do know, and their understanding is developing all the time. So what can contemporary brain science tell us, and can this knowledge help improve our ability to teach? This programme focuses on 3 areas. Some basics on how our brains function, what research can tell us about teaching creativity, and what it can tell us about unconscious learning. We're going to be talking to experts in each of these fields. Dr. Howard Jones is currently undertaking research into how we learn creatively. Dr. Harry Witchell demonstrates unconscious learning. And we start with renowned neurosurgeon Professor Hugh Coakham. Professor Coakham worked for many years at Frenchay Hospital's Department of Neurosurgery in Bristol and has an in-depth and genuinely hands-on knowledge of how our brain functions.
The 2 hemispheres of the brain have different functions. The left hemisphere of the brain has the functions of speech and numerical calculation, whereas the right-hand side of the brain, that has spatial awareness and pattern recognition. The frontal lobe is really the part of the brain that makes us human beings, because it carries the areas of the brain which determine human behavior, consideration of other people, drive, motivation, and that sort of thing. Just behind is the motor association cortex, and that is the part which formulates the sort of movements you want your body to make. Behind the association motor cortex is the motor cortex itself, and this is the part of the computer which actually causes the body to move and drives the muscles. The sensory cortex is the area of the brain where you understand and perceive all the sensations that are coming into your body, such as light touch, tickle, the wind on your face, and even pain. Just behind the sensory cortex is the sensory association area, where your brain analyzes the sort of sensations that your body is experiencing. Temporal lobes are to a great extent involved in memory, but there are small parts of the temporal lobe which are also involved in the perception of sound and understanding hearing. And right at the back of the brain is the fascinating area, the visual area and the visual association area. And scientists have now discovered that this is like a big plasma TV screen which basically sees the world as a screen does, and various parts of it will understand the signals that are coming in. In the left hemisphere of the brain, there is the important motor speech area called the Broca's area, and this is what actually makes you deliver the words and produces the words. Behind that is the sensory speech area called Wernicke's, and in that area you understand the words.
So we know that different areas of the brain have different functions, but does this mean that they work independently or together?
The whole of the brain is necessary for almost every task, and the whole brain is of course living and metabolizing all the time. It's quite interesting that modern research tells us that if you do special brain scans showing the function of the brain, that when patients are doing certain tasks, the scans light up and show us hotspots of the brain at work. And these hotspots are sometimes in the places where we would expect them to be, but sometimes they're scattered all over the place. It looks a little bit like the sky at night, indicating that different parts of the brain are all working together. Some of them are very distant, though. A good example of how we use different brain areas would be guitar playing, where of course we need motor for holding the guitar and strumming it and fingering the guitar. We need sensation to appreciate where our fingers are on the frets. We need auditory, of course, to listen to the music, and visual if we're reading the music. Learning is a very complex process, and it involves many parts of brain function, particularly sensation, reading and listening. And it also involves matching up the input of the brain to the brain's memory store. For example, you want to know, have I done this before? Have I seen this before? Is it like something that I've done before?
What can our understanding of the brain tell us about strategies to encourage creativity? To find out more about the link between brain function and teaching creativity, Dr. Howard Jones devised an experiment combining a type of brain scanning called functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, with a well-known strategy for encouraging creativity.
We carried out an experiment using fMRI to investigate a particular strategy that is used very commonly in the classroom to foster creativity. That strategy is to ask students to incorporate in whatever they're producing, poem, play, piece of art, stimuli that are essentially unrelated to each other. These things could be just randomly chosen, but whatever, they're not actually related to each other. They may not be related to the task in hand at all. Now, by doing that, we find that the outcomes tend to be increased in their creativity. More creativity is observed.
Dr. Howard Jones, himself an ex-teacher and teacher trainer, is a leading expert in the creativity field. In his brain imaging study, he found that this random stimuli strategy led to some quite specific increases in brain activity.
And it was in an area of the brain associated with higher level conscious control. And that's quite interesting because it made us look more closely at what's going on in the classroom.
To help develop this closer understanding, the experiment moved on to a study of the strategy in a real-life learning environment with a series of workshops for trainee drama teachers.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
To start with, the students were given a set of unrelated words which they have to react visually to.
Christmas. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Saturday. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Turn back round, please.
After the students have done a physical representation of a number of these random words, they were given 3 minutes to create a non-verbal narrative linking the unrelated postures together.
Yeah. It's like almost like, you know, when you give your kid medicine and when you're younger and you've got medicine to take and it's like, I don't want to take it, and you could be trying to encourage.
We could do a series by like 1, 2, 3, change 2, 3. So it tells the story through. We could do it like that.
Series of images then, yeah? Okay.
We were very interested in the reflections of the students talking about the need for extra time when the randomness of the exercise was increased. And that ties in quite neatly with what we saw in the imaging, because that type of additional conscious control that's required to make use of these strategies probably does mean extra work required. I think that it made us more sensitive to the time scale, if you like, over which these strategies are orientated. And when you're planning to use an exercise where you're deliberately incorporating some element of randomness or chance, you need to think quite carefully about how you plan that. Because if you're increasing the amount of randomness, you're increasing the amount of work that the students are having to do. And that means you need time to actually produce a quality outcome out of it.
Playing the piano is a creative activity, which most people have to be taught, but some people seem to be able to learn to play without any formal tuition. So what's happening in our brains when we learn without even being aware of it?
Unconscious learning is the process of learning, but without being necessarily able to describe what it is that you've learned.
Dr. Harry Witchell is a senior research fellow in physiology at the University of Bristol. He's particularly interested in using neuroscience, especially physiology and anatomy, to learn more about unconscious behaviour.
The experiment that we're about to work on concerns being able to measure the unconscious learning that's taking place in response to a series of stimuli which are either good or bad.
It does this by using a similar technique to that used in lie detectors to measure stress. monitoring the electrical conductance between two of the volunteers' fingers, which alters in response to minute changes in sweat, itself a measure of brain activity.
We're going to be playing a little game, okay? In it, your goal is to win as much money as possible. You can select a card from the top of any deck you like. For every card you choose, I will pay you some money. But on some cards, you will have to pay me some money, okay? You will find out how much you win or lose as we go along. It is impossible for you to work out when you will win or lose money. Some decks are worse than others, but no matter how much you find yourself losing, you can still win if you stay away from the worst decks, okay? You don't know when the game will end. Just keep playing until I tell you to stop. Do begin. So card 1 is C, and I will give you 50. Win 100. And I will give you 100. Card 63, D, win 50. Card 65 is D, win 100.
As the experiment progresses, without being aware of it, the volunteer John learns unconsciously that C and D give smaller payouts more frequently, and that decks A and B can often yield high payouts but are more risky. When he decides to take a risk and go for deck B, he becomes anxious just at the thought of it, and this stress is registered on the computer.
What we're actually looking at, and what's important, is card 98. Now, John has a very strong response because card 98 is a punishment card. It's losing 1,250. But what's interesting is his anticipatory response. So even before he actually chooses the card, we already see here that there's some kind of worry right there. And he's actually already just anticipating turning over this deck, which he had actually abandoned for some time. This response is what you might call a somatic marker. That is, from the body, there is something that you can feel, or you can actually detect physiologically as well, in terms of he's learned an association that this deck is bad. What this shows is that we learn at an unconscious level just associating good and bad with the stimuli around us. And this unconscious learning can actually precede our conscious learning, or our ability to describe what it is that's going on and what is good and what is bad. If you like, it shows that we have hunches, that that's our natural way of learning about things, and that this can occur very early in the process. It doesn't require that a person or even a student be able to describe what it is that they've learned. They will know it at some level.